I'm your host, Blake. If you're new here, this channel is all about helping you improve your English naturally. Every day, we upload new episodes where you can practice listening, learn useful vocabulary, and enjoy real-life stories told in clear and natural English. So, get comfortable, and let's begin today's episode. Today's topic is all about learning English through daily life stories. I'll share some personal experiences that show how English is used in real situations. These stories are simple, but they can help you understand how native speakers think, speak, and express ideas. A few months ago, I had an interesting experience while visiting a small bakery near my home. It was early in the morning, and I wanted to buy some fresh bread. When I entered the bakery, the smell was amazing. Warm bread, butter, and coffee in the air. I greeted the shopkeeper, Mrs. Davis, who always smiled and spoke kindly. She said, "Good morning, Blake. The usual loaf of brown bread?" I nodded and replied, "Yes, please. And maybe one of those croissants, too." That short conversation reminded me how polite phrases like, "Good morning," "Yes," "Please," and "Thank you" can make interactions friendly and natural. As I waited for my order, a young man entered the shop. He was a new customer and seemed a bit nervous because he didn't know what to order. Mrs. Davis said, "Take your time. Everything here is fresh today." The man smiled and said, "I'll try that round loaf, please." That moment made me think about how tone and kindness make communication smoother, even between strangers. Small exchanges like these are powerful listening and speaking lessons in real life. Later that day, I met my friend Daniel for lunch. We often talk about work, family, and learning goals. Daniel told me that he had recently started improving his English by listening to short podcasts every morning during his commute. He said, "It's amazing how much you can learn just by listening carefully." I agreed with him. Listening is one of the most effective ways to build confidence. It trains your ear to understand different accents, tones, and expressions. That conversation reminded me of a time when I first started learning a new language myself. I remember listening to simple stories and repeating phrases out loud. At first, I didn't understand everything, but little by little, the sounds started to make sense. The rhythm, the patterns, the tone, all of it became familiar. Just like learning English, progress comes with patience and daily practice. One evening, something unexpected happened that taught me another lesson about language. My neighbor, Mr. Wilson, knocked on my door because his garden hose had broken. He said, "Blake, could I borrow your hose for a few minutes?" I smiled and said, "Of course, take it. I'll help you connect it." We spent about 15 minutes fixing his garden. While we worked, he told me stories about his childhood, how he used to help his father in their small garden back in the countryside. I listened carefully, and his storytelling made me realize how sharing personal experiences connects people, no matter what language they speak. Later, when I returned home, I thought about how every conversation is an opportunity to learn. Even a simple chat with a neighbor can teach you new words, expressions, and cultural meanings. If you listen actively and try to understand the intention behind the words, your comprehension skills improve faster. Another day, I had a small misunderstanding at the grocery store that turned into a learning moment. I asked the cashier if they had whole wheat bread, but she thought I said white bread. When she handed it to me, I smiled and said politely, "Actually, I meant whole wheat, not white." She laughed and said, "Ah, sorry, I heard it differently." That little mistake reminded me that pronunciation matters, and being polite helps solve confusion easily. You see, mistakes are not a problem. They're part of the journey. Every learner goes through moments of confusion, but what matters most is how you respond. Instead of feeling embarrassed, take it as a chance to practice again. When you speak clearly and calmly, people will understand you better. One weekend, my wife and I visited a small village outside the city. It was peaceful, with green fields and fresh air. We stayed in a guest house run by an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Parker. They were warm and welcoming. During dinner, Mr. Parker told us stories about his youth, how he started his bakery business, and how life was before technology became so common. His English was simple but full of emotion. Listening to him made me realize that good communication is not only about grammar or vocabulary. It's about expressing feelings and sharing ideas with sincerity. The next morning, Mrs. Parker served us breakfast and said, "When I was young, I used to help my mother make bread every day. That's why I still love baking." Her story touched me because it showed how language connects memories and culture. Even when words are simple, they can carry deep meaning. After that trip, I decided to start a small routine to improve my own English communication. Every evening, I write down one short story from my day. Something simple, like what I learned, who I met, or what I noticed. It helps me practice sentence structure and reflect on how to describe experiences naturally. You can try this too. Write or record a short story about your day, and then listen to yourself again. You'll notice small mistakes and learn from them. Another thing that helps is shadowing. It means listening to a short part of an English conversation and repeating it exactly as you hear it. Same speed, same tone, same rhythm. This builds confidence and makes your speech sound more natural. I remember one of my students, Sarah, who used this method for just 15 minutes a day. After 3 months, her pronunciation and confidence improved a lot. She said that she felt more comfortable speaking with her colleagues at work and could express her ideas clearly. So even if you have only a few minutes each day, use them wisely. Consistency is more powerful than long study sessions once in a while. There was another story I want to share. A few years ago, I joined a charity event to help clean up a local park. There were volunteers from different countries: India, Japan, Spain, and many others. We all spoke English to communicate, even though everyone had different accents. At first, it was a bit difficult to understand everyone, but after a few hours, we all adjusted and worked together easily. That experience reminded me that English is not just for grammar tests or exams. It's a bridge that connects people from all over the world. Language becomes meaningful when it's used to share kindness, help others, or build friendships. When you use English in real-life situations, it becomes part of your personality, not just something you study. That's why I encourage you to listen actively every day. Whether it's a short podcast, a story, or a daily conversation, try to notice how people express ideas, how they change their tone, and how they react to emotions. Listening helps you understand not only the words, but also the feelings behind them. Now I'd like to share one last story before we continue. A few weeks ago, I met a man named Peter on the train. He was an English teacher who had taught in different countries for more than 20 years. We started talking about language learning. He said the secret is not studying harder, but studying smarter. Learn from life, from people, from your mistakes. I agreed completely. Real learning happens when you apply what you know in real situations. Peter and I continued talking for almost half an hour on that train ride. He shared some incredible experiences about teaching in small towns and big cities. One story that stood out was about a student from Thailand who used to struggle a lot with speaking. Peter said he was so nervous that he could barely introduce himself in front of others. But every day he practiced by describing what he saw around him. For example, he would say, "I see a red bus," or "I hear children playing outside." Within a few months, his confidence completely changed. That story really inspired me because it shows how powerful small, consistent habits can be. You don't have to make big speeches to get better at English. You just have to speak a little bit every day. Talk to yourself, describe your surroundings, repeat what you hear. Those simple actions build fluency naturally. When I came home that evening, I tried this idea myself. I stood on my balcony and looked outside. The air was cool, and I could hear the sound of distant traffic. I said to myself, the sky is clear tonight. The city lights are glowing softly. It may sound simple, but this practice helps you think in English instead of translating from your native language. That's one of the most important steps to becoming fluent. A few days later, something funny happened at the office. One of my coworkers, David, was preparing a presentation and he looked a bit nervous. I asked him, "Are you ready for the meeting?" He sighed and said, "Almost, but I'm worried about making grammar mistakes." I told him, "David, people don't care about small grammar errors. They care about your message. Speak clearly, show confidence, and they'll listen." After the meeting, he came to me smiling. "You were right," he said. They focused on my ideas, not my grammar. That made me think again about how language is not about perfection. It's about communication. If your listener understands your meaning, then you are already succeeding. That evening, while walking home, I thought about how often we stop ourselves from speaking because of fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of not sounding perfect. But perfection is not the goal. Progress is. Every time you speak, you improve a little. Every time you listen carefully, you grow a little. The more you use English, the more natural it feels. I remember a story from my university days. I once joined a public speaking club where members practiced giving short speeches in English. The first time I spoke, my hands were shaking and my voice was quiet. But everyone clapped and encouraged me. One of the senior members said, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be brave." That advice stayed with me for years. Whenever I face a new challenge, I remind myself that courage is the real skill behind learning. The next morning, I went to a small cafe near my office. The waiter, a friendly young man, greeted me cheerfully. "Good morning. What would you like today?" I replied, "A cup of black coffee, please." While waiting, I noticed two people sitting at a nearby table, discussing a project in English. They were clearly not native speakers, but they spoke with confidence. Their pronunciation wasn't perfect, but their communication was clear. I smiled because it was a great example of how English connects people from different backgrounds. When my coffee arrived, I thanked the waiter and started thinking about how learning English changes our everyday experiences. It opens doors to more opportunities, more conversations, and more understanding. You can travel, work with international teams, and read stories from all over the world. Language is not just a tool, it's a bridge. Later that day, I visited a small bookstore. I love visiting quiet places like that because they make me feel calm. I met the owner, Mr. Carter, who was arranging books on a shelf. We started talking, and he told me about his passion for learning new languages. He said, "When I read books in another language, I feel like I see the world through someone else's eyes." I found that idea fascinating. It reminded me that English isn't only about words, it's about perspective. Every time you learn a new phrase, you gain a new way of seeing the world. Before I left the bookstore, Mr. Carter showed me a small notebook he kept behind the counter. He said, "I write one new English expression every day. It helps me remember and use it naturally." That's another powerful learning method. If you learn one useful phrase each day, imagine how many you'll know by the end of the year. That night, while reflecting on the day, I thought about how learning never stops. Every moment, a simple conversation, a mistake, or a story becomes a lesson. Sometimes you don't even realize you're learning because it happens naturally, like breathing. The key is to stay curious and keep listening. The next weekend, my wife and I visited my parents. They live in a small town surrounded by trees and quiet streets. During dinner, my father started talking about how communication has changed over the years. He said, "When I was young, we didn't have the internet or smartphones. We learned by talking to people face to face. We listened carefully because every word mattered." That made me think about how important real conversations are. even in today's digital world. Listening face-to-face helps you understand tone, emotion, and body language, things that no textbook can fully teach. After dinner, we sat outside on the porch. The air was cool and the sky was full of stars. My mother brought us tea and said, "You know, Blake, when you were little, you used to listen to your grandfather's stories every night." I smiled, remembering those moments. My grandfather used to tell simple stories about kindness, honesty, and patience. His words were full of wisdom, and even though I didn't realize it then, those stories shaped how I think and communicate today. Listening to stories has always been a powerful way to learn, not just languages, but life lessons too. When you listen, you're not only understanding words, you're connecting with emotions and ideas. That's why storytelling is one of the best tools for learning English. It helps you remember vocabulary, practice pronunciation, and feel the natural rhythm of speech. A few days later, I met my old friend Emma at a local park. She's a teacher who uses stories in her English classes. She told me, "Whenever I teach a new phrase, I put it inside a story. Students remember it better because it feels real." I completely agreed. If you want to remember new vocabulary, use it inside a story or a personal example. That's how your brain links meaning with emotion. While walking through the park, we saw a group of children playing near the fountain. They were laughing, shouting, and using short English phrases they learned at school. It made me smile because they didn't worry about mistakes. They just spoke freely. That's what we all need to do more often. Speak without fear, enjoy the process, and let the language flow naturally. When I returned home that evening, I decided to practice by describing my day in English, just like I often tell my listeners to do. I said aloud, "Today I met Emma. We talked about teaching methods. The park was beautiful. The children were laughing. The weather was pleasant." It felt simple, but it was good practice. It helps your brain build the connection between thought and language. The next morning started quietly. I woke up early, made a cup of tea, and sat near the window. The sunlight was soft, and the street outside was still calm. I decided to use that peaceful moment to listen to an English audio story. It was about a man who learned patience while growing his small business. As I listened, I noticed how the storyteller used simple words but deep emotions. Every sentence felt alive. That's the beauty of good listening practice. You don't just hear the words, you feel them. After finishing the story, I tried to repeat some of the phrases out loud. One of them was, "Success comes slowly, one step at a time." I said it a few times, thinking about how that's true for learning English too. You can't become fluent overnight. It's a journey, and every small effort matters. Later that day, I had to visit the local library. I often go there to work or read. The librarian, Mrs. Howard, greeted me warmly and asked, "Blake, are you looking for your usual corner today?" I smiled and said, "Yes, please. It's the quietest spot." She laughed softly and said, "I thought so." Her kindness reminded me how small conversations like these are perfect opportunities to practice natural English. As I sat down with my laptop, a young student approached me. He looked curious and asked, "Excuse me, are you the one who records English podcasts?" I nodded, surprised. He smiled and said, "I listen to your episodes while studying. They help me focus." That moment made me really happy. I told him, "That's wonderful to hear. Keep practicing every day and you'll see how much progress you make." He said, "I try to repeat after you sometimes. It makes speaking easier." That's one of the best techniques for learners, repeating short phrases and listening to how native speakers express themselves. After spending a few hours at the library, I went for a walk in the nearby park. The trees were full of bright green leaves, and a light breeze made the air cool and fresh. I saw an older man sitting on a bench feeding birds. His calm expression caught my attention, and I greeted him with a smile. He nodded and said, Beautiful day, isn't it? I replied, yes, it feels peaceful. He told me he came to the park every morning to enjoy nature and think quietly. That short chat reminded me how simple interactions can teach valuable lessons about listening and responding naturally. Later, I met my colleague, Olivia, who had recently moved from another country. She was still improving her English, but she spoke with great effort and enthusiasm. During our walk, she said, "Sometimes I worry that people might not understand my accent." I told her, "Accents are beautiful. They tell a story about where you come from. Don't try to hide it. Just focus on speaking clearly." She smiled and said, "That makes me feel better." That conversation made me think about how many learners feel shy about their accent. But the truth is, everyone has one, even native speakers from different regions. What really matters is clarity and confidence. When you speak with purpose and respect, people will listen. In the evening, I joined a small community event where neighbors came together to share food and stories. Each person told a short story about a challenge they faced and what they learned from it. One man, Mr. Ahmed, shared how he started his own small grocery shop after losing his previous job. He said, "At first I was afraid, but then I decided to try. Every day I talked to customers, listened to their needs, and improved my service." His story showed that communication isn't just about speaking English. It's about connecting with people through honesty and effort. When it was my turn to speak, I shared how learning and teaching English has taught me patience. I said, "Every learner's journey is different. Some people learn quickly, while others take time. What matters most is not giving up." The people nodded, and a few came up afterward to say they related to my words. It reminded me again that stories bring people together. They help us understand each other's struggles and hopes. After returning home, I decided to write about that evening in my journal. Writing in English helps me reflect and remember useful phrases. I wrote, "Tonight I saw the power of stories. They bring warmth and understanding. They make learning more human." Journaling is another great way to practice English because it helps you organize your thoughts and improve your writing style. The next day, I had an interesting experience at work. My manager asked me to help train a new team member named Henry, who was from another country and still learning English. During the first few days, he often looked nervous. He told me, "I'm afraid I'll say something wrong." I encouraged him by saying, "Mistakes are part of learning. Everyone makes them, even native speakers." A few days later, Henry gave a short presentation. He spoke slowly and carefully, and even though he made small errors, everyone understood him clearly. Afterward, he looked relieved. I told him, "You did great. You were confident, and that's what matters." His face brightened up and he said, "I think I'm starting to enjoy speaking English." That's one of the best feelings, when fear turns into confidence. Later that week, I received an email from one of our listeners. Her name was Sophia, and she wrote, "Your podcast helped me get a job interview in English. I practiced listening every day, and it made me more confident." Reading that made me smile. It's always inspiring to hear how learners use what they practice to achieve real results in life. That message also reminded me of my own first English job interview many years ago. I was nervous, but I prepared carefully. I listened to sample interviews online, practiced answering questions aloud, and learned some useful expressions like, "I believe my skills match this role," and "I'm eager to contribute to your team." When the interview day came, I felt ready. I made small mistakes, but I stayed calm and focused. In the end, I got the job. That experience taught me that preparation and mindset are more important than perfect grammar. The next weekend, my wife and I decided to spend some time in nature. We drove to a small lake surrounded by tall trees. The water was still, and the sound of birds filled the air. While sitting near the lake, I started thinking about how peaceful moments like that can also help improve listening skills. Nature has its own rhythm. The sound of the wind, the water, the birds. When you listen carefully, you train your mind to focus. And that same focus helps when you listen to people speaking English. My wife said, "You always talk about learning, even when we're on a break." I laughed and said, "That's true. But everything around us can teach something." She smiled and said, "Then what does this lake teach you?" I thought for a moment and said, "It teaches patience. Just like learning a language, calmness brings clarity." She nodded, and we both sat quietly for a while, just listening to the sounds around us. The following week was full of new experiences and small moments that made me reflect on how English fits naturally into daily life. On Monday morning, I attended a community meeting where local residents gathered to discuss ways to make the neighborhood cleaner and safer. There were people from different countries, and English was the common language everyone used. Some spoke fluently, others carefully searched for words, but what stood out was how everyone tried to understand one another. When one man struggled to find the right phrase, another person gently helped him by saying, "Do you mean recycling bins?" The man smiled and replied, "Yes, that's what I wanted to say." It was a simple act of kindness, but it showed how communication is not just about words. It's about helping others express themselves. After the meeting, I stayed behind to help arrange the chairs. A woman named Rachel thanked me and said, "It's nice when people stay to help. It makes things easier for everyone." Her tone was warm and genuine. I replied, "I believe teamwork always makes a difference." That short conversation reminded me how polite expressions can make daily interactions smoother. Phrases like, "It's nice of you," "I appreciate that," or "That helps a lot," can turn ordinary talks into pleasant exchanges. The next day, something unexpected happened at work. The power went out for a few hours, and all of us had to find ways to stay productive without our computers. Instead of waiting, I suggested we do a short speaking activity to practice communication skills. I asked each person to tell a short story about a lesson they learned from a mistake. At first, people were shy, but soon they started sharing openly. One of my coworkers, James, said, "I once missed an important deadline because I didn't double-check an email." Everyone laughed lightly, and he added, "Now I read every email twice before sending it." That story made us all realize how little errors can become learning moments. When it was my turn, I shared how, years ago, I once gave a presentation with the wrong slides because I didn't rename the file properly. It was embarrassing, but I used humor to keep calm and continued speaking confidently. Afterward, my manager said, "You handled that situation really well." That day, I learned that confidence often matters more than perfection. Later that evening, I visited a nearby cafe to read. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching people pass by. A young man next to me was practicing English with flashcards. I smiled and said, "Are you studying for an exam?" He nodded and replied, "Yes, for my university test." But sometimes I forget the words right after learning them. I told him, "Try using new words in sentences immediately after learning them. When you connect words with real-life situations, you remember them longer." His eyes brightened, and he said, "That makes sense. I'll start doing that." Moments like that remind me how sharing advice can help others grow. On Wednesday, I had an important presentation at work. I spent the night before practicing my speech out loud. I recorded myself and played it back to notice where my tone could be smoother. Listening to your own voice is one of the best ways to improve pronunciation. During the presentation, I remembered to speak slowly, make eye contact, and use clear pauses between points. When it ended, several colleagues congratulated me. My manager said, "You spoke naturally and confidently." That compliment made me realize how much daily practice really pays off. After work, I stopped by the park for a short walk. A group of children were playing football, laughing and cheering. Nearby, an elderly man sat feeding pigeons. I greeted him, and he responded kindly. "I come here every day," he said. "It keeps me active and happy." We talked for a while, and I noticed how simple his English was, yet it carried warmth and clarity. He used expressions like, "It's a good day today," and "I like the quiet here." His speech reminded me that good communication isn't about fancy vocabulary. It's about being clear and sincere. On Thursday, my friend Daniel invited me to his home for dinner. His wife cooked a traditional meal, and we all sat together talking about life and work. During the meal, Daniel's son asked me, "Why do people learn English even if it's not their first language?" I smiled and said, "Because English connects people from all over the world. It helps us share ideas and learn from each other." His wife added, "And it helps people find better opportunities, too." That conversation turned into a thoughtful discussion about how language shapes understanding. Later that night, on my way home, I thought about how English has become a bridge in my own life. It allowed me to make friends from many countries, travel with confidence, and learn from people I might never have met otherwise. It's more than a language. It's a tool for connection and growth. The next morning, I woke up early to go jogging. The weather was cool and the streets were quiet. As I ran, I listened to a short English story on my headphones. It was about a teacher who learned the importance of patience. The story said, "A tree doesn't grow faster just because you water it more. It grows at its own pace." That line stayed in my mind for the whole run. It reminded me that language learning works the same way. You can't force progress. You can only stay consistent and let it grow naturally. At the end of my run, I met a man walking his dog. He greeted me and said, "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" I replied, "It is. Perfect weather for a walk." We chatted for a minute about how exercise helps clear the mind. That short exchange showed how small talk can make your day feel brighter and more connected. Later that day, at the office, our team had a group discussion about a new project. Everyone shared their ideas, and I noticed how clear communication made the teamwork smoother. When someone didn't understand a point, we used polite questions like, "Could you explain that again?" Or "Do you mean this?" These simple expressions prevent confusion and show respect. After the meeting, one of my coworkers said, "I like how you make discussions calm and clear." I replied, "That's the key to good teamwork. Listening first, then speaking." That evening, I stopped by a local farmer's market. There were colorful stalls selling fruits, vegetables, and handmade items. One seller offered me a sample of honey and said, "This one's from my own farm. Try it." I tasted it and said, "It's delicious." "How long have you been making honey?" He smiled proudly and said, "More than 10 years. It started as a small hobby, but now it's my main work." His enthusiasm made me realize how sharing passion through words can make any conversation lively. On Saturday, my wife and I visited a nearby orphanage to volunteer. We helped organize books and spend time with the children. One little boy asked me to read a story in English. I picked up a simple book about a bird learning to fly. As I read, the children listened quietly. When I finished, one of them said, "Can you read another one?" Their excitement reminded me that storytelling has power. It opens minds and hearts. Even young learners feel the magic of language when it's shared with care. After leaving the orphanage, we stopped by a small restaurant for lunch. The waiter asked politely, "Would you like to try our special dish today?" I said, "Sure, what is it?" He explained the ingredients clearly, and I appreciated how confident he sounded. It reminded me that practicing English at work can also build professionalism. Good customer service often depends on clear and friendly communication. On Sunday, I decided to spend the morning in silence. No phone, no music, just reflection. I sat with a notebook and wrote about what I had learned during the week. I wrote, "Every day brings a new chance to listen, speak, and grow. English is not a subject to study, but a skill to live with." Writing that helped me realize how learning a language becomes part of your identity. Later, I went to visit my friend Henry, the new coworker I had been helping earlier. He had prepared tea and said proudly, "I tried to use only English this week." I congratulated him and asked how it went. He said, "At first it was hard, but now I can think faster, and I don't translate every word." That progress made me smile. It showed that confidence grows through consistent effort, not overnight success. In the afternoon, I joined my neighbors for a small gardening project. We planted flowers along the sidewalk. One of the neighbors, Mr. Patel, said, "Gardening teaches patience and care, just like learning." I laughed and said, "You're absolutely right. Both take time and attention." As we worked, we talked about family, culture, and simple joys in life. The conversations flowed naturally, and I noticed how English made everyone feel included. That evening, I received a message from one of my old students, Clara. She wrote, "I finally passed my English exam. Thank you for your encouragement." I replied, "That's wonderful news. You earned it through your dedication." Her message reminded me that progress in English is not measured by one test, but by persistence over time. Before going to bed, I thought about everything that had happened during the week. From community meetings and office discussions to volunteering and quiet reflections, every moment taught something new about communication, patience, and understanding. Language learning is like living, full of small steps, mistakes, and discoveries. The key is to keep moving forward, one story at a time. After that long week, I decided I needed some fresh air, so I took a short weekend trip to a nearby town called Maple Ridge. It's a quiet little place surrounded by hills and green fields. I booked a small guest house run by an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper. They were friendly and full of stories about the town's history. On my first morning there, I woke up early, opened the window, and felt that cool breeze from the valley. It reminded me how sometimes the simplest moments can make you feel calm and alive. I made a cup of tea, sat near the window, and watched the sunrise. Later that day, I went for a walk through the local market. People were selling fresh vegetables, handmade bread, and small wooden crafts. One man named Daniel was carving a wooden bird, and I stopped to watch him. We started talking, and he told me he had been doing woodwork since he was a child. He said something that stayed in my mind. "If you do one thing with care every day, you'll never feel wasted." That line sounded simple, but it was deep. I thought about how many times we rush through life, trying to do everything at once, and forget to enjoy one small thing done well. That evening, I joined the Coopers for dinner. Mrs. Cooper made soup from vegetables she grew in her garden. She said she never buys vegetables from the store because growing them gives her joy. Mr. Cooper shared stories about when he was young, how the town used to have only one road and everyone knew each other by name. Listening to them made me realize how much our modern lives have changed. We live fast, but sometimes slow living can make us happier. The next morning, I went hiking on a trail that led to a waterfall. It took almost 2 hours to reach it, and along the way, I met a man named Aaron who was also hiking alone. We started walking together and had a great conversation about work and life. He told me he had recently changed his job from a big city company to a small local business. He said it gave him more time to spend with his family. That conversation reminded me of how balance matters more than success. We often think that more work means more happiness, but sometimes less can actually give us more peace. When I reached the waterfall, I sat on a rock and listened to the sound of the water. It was powerful and calming at the same time. In that silence, I thought about how important it is to pause and reflect. Life can be noisy, full of tasks, plans, and notifications. But moments like that teach you to slow down and breathe. After returning from the trip, I felt more refreshed and clear-minded. On Monday morning, I made a promise to myself to start each day with something positive. Maybe reading a short article, taking a short walk, or even making my bed with focus. It sounds simple, but doing small things with attention can change your mood. One day, I had a small but meaningful experience at a coffee shop near my office. The barista there, named Sarah, always remembers people's names. One day I asked her how she does it. She said she repeats the name in her mind when the person says it, and then uses it again before they leave. It made me realize how important small details are in human connection. We all like being remembered. It makes us feel valued. A few days later, I had to prepare a presentation at work. Normally, I get a bit nervous before speaking in front of people, but that day I tried something different. Before starting, I took a deep breath and imagined that I was just talking to friends. I told a short story about how our project started, including a funny mistake we made in the beginning. Everyone laughed, and the room instantly felt lighter. That taught me that stories are powerful tools. Even in professional situations, when you use a story, people connect to your words. That experience encouraged me to speak more naturally. Later, during lunch, one of my coworkers told me, "Blake, your presentation felt real." That was the best feedback I could get. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being authentic. I think many English learners struggle with that too, wanting to sound perfect instead of real. But in truth, good communication is about connection, not perfection. That evening, while walking home, I passed by a small park. I saw a young boy helping his grandmother cross a path. It was such a simple act of kindness, yet it touched my heart. I thought about how language learning can be like that. It's about helping others understand, showing patience, and being kind to yourself when you make mistakes. Over the next few days, I decided to challenge myself by speaking only English at home. My wife helped me practice. We decided to use English during dinner conversations, even when it felt a little strange. Sometimes we laughed at our mistakes, but it made learning more natural and fun. She once told me, "Learning is not about speed. It's about consistency." That's so true. If you do something regularly, even for 10 minutes, you'll see progress. Another thing I started doing was journaling in English every night. I didn't write long paragraphs, just small reflections. For example, one day I wrote, "Today I learned to stay calm when things go wrong." Another day, "I'm grateful for a quiet morning." It helped me build vocabulary and also made me more aware of my emotions. Writing is not just about words. It's about thinking clearly. One weekend, I visited my friend Daniel and his family. They live in a countryside house with a small garden full of herbs and flowers. Daniel told me that every evening they sit outside and talk about their day. No phones, no screens, just talking. His children share what they learned in school, and his wife shares something funny from her day. I joined them that evening, and it felt peaceful. That experience reminded me how communication builds strong relationships. You don't need fancy words, just honest ones. On my way back home, I stopped by a small bakery. An older woman was selling homemade bread. She told me that she wakes up every morning at 4 a.m. to start baking. When I asked her why she keeps doing it after so many years, she said, "Because every loaf reminds me that effort creates results." That sentence stayed with me. In English learning, it's the same. Each small effort adds up, even when you don't see results right away. A few days later, I joined an online group for English conversation practice. There were people from different countries: Japan, Brazil, Egypt, and Spain. Everyone had different accents, but it was amazing how we could all understand each other through one language. During that call, one participant said, "Learning English helped me make friends from places I've never been to." That made me smile because it's true. Language connects the world. At the end of that week, I sat down to reflect again. I realized that many of the good things that happened came from simple acts. Saying hello to someone, helping a stranger, taking a walk, writing a few lines, or listening with focus. These things may look small, but they build a better life. And better English, too. One story I remember clearly happened a few years ago. I once got lost while traveling in another city. My phone battery had died, and I didn't know the way to my hotel. I went to a small grocery shop and asked an old man for directions. His English was limited, but he tried his best to help me. He even drew a small map on paper. That experience taught me how kindness and effort can bridge language barriers. It also reminded me to never be afraid to speak, even if your English isn't perfect. People appreciate your effort. Recently, I also started mentoring a new colleague at work. He's from another country and still improving his English. On his first day, he looked nervous, so I shared with him my own story of learning and making mistakes. I told him, confidence doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from being okay with learning. Over time, I noticed how he began speaking more naturally, even making jokes during meetings. That showed me how encouragement can make a huge difference. Every day, I try to find one moment that teaches me something. Whether it's during a conversation, while reading, or just watching people interact. For example, I once saw a delivery driver greeting every customer with a smile, even though he was clearly tired. That taught me that attitude matters more than conditions. You can't control everything around you, but you can control how you respond. In my daily English routine, I also listen to short podcasts while walking. I pick topics that relate to real life, stories about people, travel, or culture. Listening regularly helped me get used to different accents and natural expressions. Sometimes I even repeat sentences out loud to improve pronunciation. It feels like a friendly conversation, not a lesson. And that's something I want you to remember too. Learning English doesn't always have to feel like studying. It can be part of your everyday life. When you talk to someone new, when you describe your day, when you write about something that made you smile, every moment can be a small step toward fluency. The following week started with a quiet Monday morning. I woke up early, brewed a cup of coffee, and decided to take a short walk before heading to work. The streets were empty, and the air was crisp and fresh. I saw a man jogging and a few neighbors walking their dogs. One of them, an older gentleman named Mr. Lewis, stopped to say hello. We started chatting about the weather, and soon the conversation turned to how daily routines can shape your mindset. He said, "I like to start my day by noticing small things, like the colors of flowers or the birds singing. It makes the day feel brighter." His words reminded me that paying attention to details in life is just as important as noticing details in language. At work that morning, I noticed a new project on my desk. It involved communicating with a team from another country. I thought about how listening carefully and speaking clearly would be crucial. I spent some time preparing phrases I might use during calls, and I even practiced saying them aloud quietly. This small preparation made me feel more confident before the first meeting. During the call, I spoke slowly and clearly, making sure everyone understood my points. I noticed that using short, simple sentences helped. One colleague from Spain said, "Thank you for clarifying. That's very helpful." I realized that communication is not about complex words or perfect grammar. It's about making sure your message is clear and easy to understand. After the meeting, I had lunch at a small cafe nearby. While waiting, I noticed a young woman practicing English with her friend. They were repeating phrases from a language app. I smiled and said, "It's good to practice speaking every day." She nodded, and we started talking about learning methods. She told me that she writes down new words in a notebook and tries to use them in sentences. I suggested, "You could also try using them in short stories or conversations with friends. That way, They stick better. She seemed excited and said she would try it. Later in the afternoon, I went to the library to return a few books. The librarian, Mrs. Green, asked if I wanted any recommendations. I said yes, and she suggested a few novels with simple but meaningful language. I chose one about a family running a small bakery in a rural town. Reading stories like that helps improve comprehension and exposes you to everyday expressions that you can use naturally in conversation. On Tuesday, I decided to visit a local park for a short walk during my break. The sun was shining, and the park was filled with the sound of children playing and birds chirping. I saw a woman teaching her child how to ride a bicycle. I walked over and complimented the child, saying, "You're doing great! Keep going!" The mother smiled and said, "He's learning new words too. We talk in English sometimes." That reminded me that learning can happen everywhere, even in the simplest moments. Later that evening, my wife and I prepared dinner together. We practiced describing the ingredients and cooking steps in English. For example, I said, "We need to chop the onions finely and sauté them until they are golden brown." She followed the instructions, and we both laughed when I accidentally dropped a piece of garlic on the floor. Using English in daily activities, like cooking, helps reinforce vocabulary naturally and makes the language part of everyday life. On Wednesday, I joined a virtual meeting for a professional development course. The instructor encouraged us to share personal experiences related to the topic. I shared a story about a time I had to explain a complicated process to a new colleague who was still learning English. I said, "I realized that breaking information into smaller steps and using clear examples makes communication easier." The instructor praised this approach, and other participants asked questions about how to practice speaking naturally. After the meeting, I walked to a nearby bookstore. I enjoy browsing books on personal development and communication. One book caught my attention. It was about how small habits can lead to significant improvements. I read a passage aloud. "Consistency beats intensity. Small actions repeated daily create lasting change." I thought about how this applies to language learning. Practicing a few minutes every day is more effective than studying for hours occasionally. That evening, I received a message from my student, Lucas. He wrote, "I listened to your latest podcast and I tried repeating the sentences aloud. It feels easier now." I replied, "That's excellent. Keep practicing every day and you will notice even more improvement." Messages like these remind me that progress in English comes from consistent effort and confidence in using what you learn. On Thursday, I had a chance to help a new colleague, Sarah, who was struggling to write emails in English. I suggested she draft her message first and then read it aloud before sending. This helped her notice mistakes and improve clarity. After a few tries, she told me, "It's easier than I thought. I feel more confident now." Teaching or helping others is another way to reinforce your own skills. Later that afternoon, I attended a workshop about public speaking. The trainer emphasized storytelling as a tool to engage listeners. She said, "People remember stories more than facts." During the session, I practiced telling a short story about a time I missed a bus but discovered a new cafe while waiting. Everyone laughed, and I noticed how using personal experiences makes communication more engaging. On Friday, I went to a local community center to attend a cultural exchange meeting. People from different countries shared customs, food, and phrases from their languages. I listened to a Japanese woman explain how her family celebrates a festival each year. I asked questions politely, and she answered patiently. Even though her English wasn't perfect, her enthusiasm and effort made the conversation clear and enjoyable. I realized that expressing yourself confidently matters more than speaking flawlessly. That weekend, my wife and I decided to take a short road trip to a nearby lake. The drive was calm, with little traffic, and we enjoyed listening to an audiobook in English along the way. The story was about a man who overcame challenges by focusing on small daily actions. As we listened, I repeated sentences aloud to practice pronunciation. By the time we arrived, I felt more confident speaking naturally. At the lake, we rented a small boat. While rowing, we talked about the scenery and described everything we saw in English. For example, I said, "The water is calm and the reflections of the trees are beautiful." My wife added, "The sky is bright and I can see the mountains in the distance." Talking about what you see around you helps you think in English and improves fluency. After returning from the trip, I spent Sunday reflecting on the week. I realized that every small conversation, every story, and every moment of listening contributed to my progress. Simple interactions, like asking a question, complimenting someone, or sharing a story, all help reinforce language skills naturally. That evening, I received an email from another listener named Clara. She said, "I tried describing my day in English like you suggested, and it helped me think faster and speak more naturally." I replied, "That's wonderful. Keep doing it every day. Your progress will continue." Personal feedback like this reinforces the idea that consistent practice and real-life application are key to improvement. During the following week, I also experimented with recording myself speaking about different topics. One morning, I recorded a 2-minute story about my childhood dog. After listening, I noticed areas where I could improve pronunciation and sentence flow. This self-review technique is very effective because it helps you catch mistakes that you might not notice while speaking naturally. Another day, I met my colleague Henry for a short coffee break. We practiced giving short explanations in English about our work. I said, "I organize data for reports and I make sure everything is accurate before submitting." Henry repeated a similar explanation about his tasks. Practicing professional language in small sessions helps build confidence for real work situations. Later that week, I attended a community cooking class. We prepared a traditional vegetable stew, and the instructor explained each step slowly. I repeated her instructions aloud to practice speaking. When I had to explain the process to someone else, I noticed that I could use clear sentences naturally. Teaching or describing actions helps strengthen both vocabulary and sentence structure. On Wednesday evening, I went for a quiet walk near the river. I noticed a family feeding ducks, and I joined their conversation politely. I said, "The ducks seem happy today." The father replied, "Yes, they enjoy the food and the sun." Talking about what you observe is a simple but effective way to practice English daily. The following weekend, my wife and I invited friends over for a small board game night. We explained the rules of the game in English before starting. While playing, everyone had to describe moves and strategies in English. This exercise helped all of us think quickly and communicate clearly while having fun. Games can be a practical and enjoyable way to improve language skills. During the evening, I reflected on how much progress I had made through small, consistent efforts. Listening to stories, repeating sentences, writing reflections, describing surroundings, and engaging in conversations. All of these contributed to a stronger understanding and fluency in English. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that language is alive. You don't need perfection. You need connection. Every story you tell, every question you ask, and every observation you make adds to your ability to communicate naturally. The more you engage, the more confident you become. Even simple daily routines offer opportunities to practice. Making coffee, preparing meals, walking in a park, or helping someone, all these moments are chances to use English meaningfully. When you treat English as part of your daily life, it stops being a subject to study and becomes a tool to experience the world. I also realized that mistakes are not failures. They are lessons. I remember one morning when I accidentally used the wrong verb tense while explaining a past event to a colleague. Instead of worrying, I corrected myself and continued the conversation. My colleague nodded and said, "I understood you perfectly." That moment reinforced that clarity and confidence outweigh perfect grammar. Another technique I found useful was describing objects and actions as they happen. For example, while cooking, I say aloud, "I add 2 teaspoons of sugar." I stir slowly to mix the ingredients. While walking outside, I describe the environment. "The wind is gentle. The leaves are green. A few birds are flying above." This method trains your brain to think in English naturally without translating from your native language. I also made it a habit to listen to English audio stories while commuting. They were not just stories, but also examples of real-life conversations. Repeating phrases aloud immediately after hearing them helped improve pronunciation and fluency. Listening actively rather than passively ensures better comprehension and natural speech. During one afternoon, I visited a small art gallery. I read descriptions of paintings in English and discussed them with the gallery owner. I said, "I like how the artist used colors to show emotion." He replied, "Yes, the contrast tells a story without words." Discussing art or any subject you enjoy in English makes learning engaging and meaningful. A few days later, I noticed a new neighbor moving in. I went to greet him politely and started a conversation. I asked about the neighborhood and shared a few tips. We spoke for about 10 minutes. By using English in real-life social situations, I realized that learning becomes much more practical and enjoyable. Even small weekly routines help. On Sunday mornings, I spend 20 minutes reviewing new words or phrases I learned during the week. I write them in a notebook and create simple sentences. This small practice builds long-term retention. I also discovered that recording short reflections about my day in English is very useful. I usually spend 5 minutes narrating my experiences, what I saw, learned, or felt. Then, I listen back and note areas to improve. This self-feedback is one of the fastest ways to enhance natural speech. By now, I started noticing changes in myself. Speaking English felt more fluid, and I could describe daily life without searching for words. I could also understand different accents better and follow conversations more easily. Confidence had become my strongest ally in learning. Even small gestures like saying thank you or I appreciate that in English strengthen communication. Polite expressions create a positive environment and encourage interaction. Another key lesson came from observing children. Their natural curiosity and fearlessness in using language reminded me that mistakes are normal and part of learning. When you speak without fear, your mind adapts quickly, and fluency grows naturally. In addition to personal practice, I joined a weekly conversation group. Each week, participants discussed topics ranging from hobbies to current events. Sharing opinions and listening to different perspectives improved not only my language, but also my understanding of culture and ideas. That week, I also started reading short articles about daily life experiences. After reading each article, I summarized it aloud in English. This technique helps reinforce comprehension and speaking skills simultaneously. Even ordinary chores offer learning opportunities. For example, folding laundry or washing dishes can be accompanied by self-narration. I fold the shirts neatly. I put the socks together. I wipe the counter clean. These simple actions become practice moments. Visiting the farmer's market again, I practiced bargaining politely in English. I said, "Can you give me a better price if I buy 2?" The seller smiled and agreed. Short exchanges like these improve everyday conversational skills. I also spent some time describing my surroundings to my wife during walks. For instance, the clouds are moving slowly. The sun is bright. The leaves rustle in the wind. Simple descriptions help your brain stay in English mode and make thinking in English natural. Listening to English podcasts daily continues to be a cornerstone of my learning. I choose stories, interviews, or discussions about real-life topics. Pausing, repeating, and reflecting on key phrases ensures that listening translates into speaking. Through all these experiences, I've learned that English becomes easier when it's integrated into daily life. Whether through personal reflection, conversations, reading, or observation, every small effort counts. Consistency, curiosity, and connection are the most important elements. Even small daily rituals like greeting neighbors, complimenting someone, or describing your day reinforce practical language skills. Observing interactions around you, listening actively, and practicing out loud strengthens fluency. Real-life experiences teach lessons that textbooks cannot. For example, watching someone's body language, tone of voice, and expressions adds depth to understanding. Combining listening, speaking, and observation creates natural learning moments. I also noticed the importance of feedback. When someone corrects your phrasing kindly, it becomes an opportunity to improve. Mistakes are a natural part of learning, and embracing them builds resilience and confidence. Lastly, I reflected on the power of stories. Sharing your experiences, listening to others, and creating narratives around daily life make English learning engaging. Stories connect ideas, emotions, and words in a way that helps memory and natural expression. From quiet mornings to social gatherings, from personal reflections to professional meetings, every day provides new opportunities to practice and grow. By staying curious, consistent, and confident, English becomes a natural part of life. That Monday morning, I decided to take a longer walk before starting work. The sun was just rising and the streets were peaceful. As I walked past a small bakery, I saw the baker arranging fresh bread on the shelves. I greeted him and he responded with a smile, "Good morning. Fresh bread for a fresh day." I laughed quietly and replied, "Exactly. It makes the morning better." Even small interactions like this, just a few sentences, can give practice in thinking and responding in English naturally. On my way to work, I noticed a man walking his dog. The dog kept jumping happily around him, and I couldn't help but comment, "Your dog seems very energetic today." The man laughed and said, "Yes, he doesn't stop until he's tired." This short exchange reminded me how simple observations can be turned into conversation. Observing your surroundings and commenting naturally is a great way to practice English daily. At work, I had a chance to lead a short team discussion. The topic was about planning a community event. I encouraged each team member to share their ideas in English, even if they were unsure. One colleague, Maria, suggested adding games for children. I said, "That's a fantastic idea. It will make the event enjoyable for families." By praising contributions politely, communication becomes smoother and encourages participation. Later that afternoon, I went to a nearby park to read. I noticed a young man practicing English aloud while sitting on a bench. I sat nearby and asked him politely, "Are you studying English for school or work?" He replied, "I want to improve my speaking skills." I shared a tip I often use. Try describing what you see around you in English. It helps you think naturally in the language. He thanked me and said he would try it during his walks. This reinforced my belief that small advice can make a big difference. That evening, I spent time with my wife preparing dinner. We decided to practice English by describing every step in detail. I said, "Now we need to chop the carrots into thin slices." She replied, "I will chop them carefully." Then we sauté them with onions. Using English in daily activities like this turns ordinary routines into learning moments and improves vocabulary organically. On Tuesday morning, I had a meeting with a client from another country. I made a conscious effort to speak clearly and avoid complex phrases. Instead of saying, let's consider optimizing the process, I said, let's think about how to make the process better. The client nodded, smiled, and replied, that's easy to understand. Thank you. This experience showed me that simplicity and clarity often matter more than advanced vocabulary. During lunch, I visited a small cafe where the barista always remembers regular customers. I said, I would like a cappuccino, please. She smiled and asked, do you want the usual sugar amount? I nodded. Yes, thank you. This short interaction reminded me how repetition and consistency help reinforce phrases naturally. Using English daily in small moments strengthens both vocabulary and confidence. In the afternoon, I spent time organizing my notes and reviewing new words I had learned during the week. I wrote short sentences using these words and read them aloud. For example, I enjoy walking in the park every morning, or helping others makes me happy. Repetition and self-practice improve retention and make phrases feel more natural in conversation. Later that evening, I visited a local library to return a book and browse for something new. The librarian suggested a book about daily life stories from different countries. I decided to borrow it and read the first chapter while sitting on a bench outside. Reading stories in English exposes you to practical expressions and everyday vocabulary that you can use in real-life situations. On Wednesday, I had a small but interesting experience at work. A new team member, Ravi, was struggling to explain a point during a meeting. I asked politely, do you want to explain it in a different way? He smiled and tried again, using simpler sentences. Later, I told him, you explained it clearly. Good job. Encouragement and polite feedback are crucial in helping others practice English while reinforcing your own skills. That afternoon, I decided to take a short walk around my neighborhood. I passed by a small garden where a couple was planting flowers. I commented, your garden looks beautiful. They smiled and said, thank you. Gardening relaxes us after a busy week. Observing daily life and speaking about it naturally improves descriptive skills in English. Later in the evening, my wife and I planned a small movie night at home. While preparing snacks, we practiced giving instructions in English. I said, please pour some juice into the glasses. And she replied, I will add a little ice as well. Using English in cooperative tasks reinforces practical language skills and encourages natural conversation. On Thursday morning, I joined a virtual English speaking group. Each participant had to tell a story from their week. I shared about my walk in the morning and my conversation with the bakery owner. Others shared about their families, pets, or hobbies. Listening to different stories exposes you to varied vocabulary and sentence structures. Sharing your own experiences helps you practice storytelling naturally. After the session, I went to a nearby park to relax. I watched children playing with a ball and decided to narrate the scene aloud in English. I said, the children are laughing and running. They are taking turns kicking the ball. Describing real-life situations aloud helps your brain think in English naturally. Later that day, I visited a local cafe to meet my friend James. We practiced discussing our week in English. I said, I walked in the park and spoke to some neighbors. He replied, I tried cooking a new recipe and it went well. Talking about daily routines in English is an excellent way to improve fluency without feeling like studying. That evening, my wife and I decided to try a new recipe for dinner. While cooking, we described the process in English step by step. I said, first, we need to wash the vegetables thoroughly. She replied, then we slice them into small pieces. Daily practice in real-life situations strengthens both vocabulary and sentence structure. On Friday, I had a short meeting with a client from another country. I made an effort to speak slowly and clearly. I said, we can start with the first step and check progress after that. The client smiled and said, perfect, that's clear. Practicing clarity and simplicity in professional settings improves confidence and communication skills. During lunch, I walked to a nearby bookstore. I picked a book about a small town and its daily life stories. I read a few pages aloud to practice pronunciation and intonation. Reading aloud makes sentences more familiar and builds confidence in speaking naturally. Later in the afternoon, I decided to record a short story about my day in English. I spoke about my walk, my meeting, and my dinner preparation. Listening to the recording helped me notice areas for improvement, such as pronunciation or sentence flow. Self-recording is an excellent technique for building speaking confidence. That evening, my wife and I went for a quiet walk around the neighborhood. We described the environment in English. The sun is setting. The sky is orange. A few people are jogging. Narrating surroundings aloud turns ordinary walks into practical language practice. On Saturday morning, I joined a small group volunteering at a community garden. We worked together, planting vegetables. While working, we talked in English, describing actions and plans. I said, "I will water these plants carefully," and another volunteer replied, "I will remove the weeds nearby." Working together while speaking English provides natural, practical practice. Later that day, I met my friend Daniel for coffee. We discussed our weekly experiences. I shared a story about my walk and my conversation with the bakery owner. He shared a story about helping his neighbor with gardening. Sharing stories naturally improves fluency and listening comprehension. That evening, my wife and I reflected on our day and described what we were grateful for in English. I said, "I am grateful for a calm morning walk." She said, "I'm grateful for the time we spent cooking together." Expressing gratitude in English is a simple but meaningful way to practice speaking and positive thinking. On Sunday, I spent the morning journaling in English. I wrote about small experiences, meeting people, visiting the park, and observing daily life. Writing helps structure thoughts and reinforces vocabulary. Afterward, I read my journal aloud to practice pronunciation and fluency. That afternoon, I visited a nearby market to buy groceries. I spoke to vendors in English, asking questions like, "How much are these tomatoes?" And "Are these freshly harvested?" Small interactions in daily life are valuable for practical language skills. Later that day, I walked by the river and narrated the scene aloud. The water is clear, ducks are swimming, children are feeding them. Describing what you observe improves fluency and builds confidence in forming sentences naturally. During the evening, my wife and I discussed plans for the upcoming week in English. We listed tasks and described how we would accomplish them. I said, "Tomorrow, I will visit the library to return books." She replied, "I will prepare dinner early." Planning and narrating activities in English. On Monday morning, I joined an online English conversation group. We shared stories from the weekend. I told them about the community garden volunteering. Participants asked questions, and I answered naturally. Interactive sessions like these help improve listening, comprehension, and spontaneous speaking skills. That afternoon, I walked through a small park and described my observations aloud. The flowers are blooming. The birds are singing. People are walking dogs. Narrating surroundings helps your brain think in English automatically. Later, I visited a small cafe and spoke to the barista about coffee preferences. I said, "I would like a cappuccino with less sugar." She smiled and replied, "Of course. Enjoy your drink." Everyday conversations like this reinforce polite expressions and vocabulary. That evening, my wife and I prepared a new recipe. I described each step in English while cooking. I chop the onions finely. I sauté them until they turn golden. She followed along, and we laughed when I dropped a piece of garlic. Using English in practical tasks makes learning enjoyable and natural. On Tuesday, I met a colleague, Sarah, to review a project. I explained my work clearly in English. I have organized the data and prepared the report. We can review it together. She asked questions, and I answered naturally. Professional interactions strengthen language skills in context. During lunch, I visited a bookstore to read a story about daily life. I read aloud to practice fluency and pronunciation. Reading stories aloud connects comprehension and speaking naturally. That afternoon, I recorded a short story about my weekend. Speaking aloud helps recognize mistakes and improve sentence flow. Self-practice and reflection are essential for building confidence in English. Later, my wife and I went for a quiet walk. We described the neighborhood in English. The sun is setting. The sky is red. People are walking dogs. Narrating everyday observations builds fluency naturally. On Wednesday, I joined an online group discussion. Participants shared personal experiences. I told a story about helping a neighbor with gardening. Listening and sharing stories enhances vocabulary and comprehension. That Thursday morning, I woke up a bit earlier than usual and decided to take a walk along the river. The water was calm, reflecting the soft morning light. I saw a man fishing quietly and nodded to him. He smiled and said, "Good morning. It's a peaceful day, isn't it?" I agreed and replied, "Yes, the calm water makes the morning perfect." Small conversations like this are excellent for practicing polite, natural English while observing your surroundings. After returning home, I made a cup of tea and started planning my day. I realized that setting intentions in English can help organize thoughts clearly. I wrote a short list aloud. I will finish the report, practice English for 30 minutes, and call a friend. Speaking your plans out loud reinforces vocabulary related to daily routines and personal goals. Later that morning, I went to the grocery store. While choosing vegetables, I asked a staff member, "Are these tomatoes fresh?" She replied, "Yes, they were picked this morning." I thanked her and continued browsing. Asking questions and responding politely in English is a practical way to strengthen conversational skills. On my way back, I met my neighbor, Mr. Clark, who was gardening. I said, "Your flowers are blooming beautifully." He responded, "Thank you. Gardening keeps me active and happy." Talking about everyday activities with others not only practices vocabulary, but also builds confidence in small social interactions. That afternoon, I joined an online English group. The topic was sharing experiences from the past week. I talked about my walk by the river and my conversation with Mr. Clark. Another participant shared a story about trying a new recipe at home. Listening to different experiences and expressing your own helps improve both comprehension and natural speaking skills. Later, I visited a small library near my house. I picked up a short storybook about a family running a bakery in a small town. While reading aloud, I focused on pronunciation and sentence rhythm. Reading stories aloud bridges comprehension and speaking fluency effectively. That evening, my wife and I prepared dinner together. I described each step in English. I will chop the carrots finely. Then I will sauté them with onions. She followed along and added, I will stir them gently. Practicing English during daily tasks makes the language a natural part of life rather than something separate. On Friday morning, I had a brief meeting with a client from another country. I explained a project update clearly. We have completed the first phase, and now we are reviewing results. The client smiled and said, "That is very clear. Thank you." Speaking in simple, precise sentences ensures understanding and builds confidence in professional contexts. During lunch, I walked to a cafe to enjoy a cup of coffee. I spoke briefly to the barista. "I would like a latte with less sugar, please." She smiled and asked, "Do you want it hot or iced?" I replied, "Hot, please." Short exchanges like these reinforce everyday conversational phrases naturally. Later that afternoon, I decided to record myself narrating the day's activities in English. I described my morning walk, meeting, and lunch. Listening to the recording helped me notice areas for improvement in pronunciation and sentence flow. Recording and self-review are effective tools for building fluency. That evening, my wife and I took a short walk around the neighborhood. I described the scene aloud. The sky is turning orange. A few people are walking dogs. The air feels cool and fresh. Narrating what you observe strengthens the ability to think in English spontaneously. On Saturday morning, I joined a small community project in a local park. Volunteers were planting trees and cleaning up pathways. I introduced myself and spoke with a few people in English. I said, "I am happy to help today. Where should I start?" One volunteer guided me, and we worked together while talking about daily routines. Volunteering provides a natural environment to practice English while interacting meaningfully. Later, I visited a friend named Daniel. We discussed our week in English. I shared a story about helping at the park. He talked about a small project he completed at home. Sharing experiences in English helps improve narrative skills and builds confidence in expressing ideas clearly. That evening, my wife and I prepared dinner. I described the steps in English. We need to boil the pasta for 10 minutes. Then we will mix it with the sauce. She followed and added, "I will grate the cheese while you stir the sauce." Using English during routine activities reinforces practical vocabulary and sentence structure. On Sunday, I spent the morning journaling in English. I wrote about interactions with neighbors, my walk, and volunteering at the park. Afterward, I read my journal aloud to practice pronunciation and natural speech patterns. Journaling and reading aloud strengthen both writing and speaking skills simultaneously. That afternoon, I visited a small market for groceries. I asked a vendor, "Are these apples fresh today?" He replied, "Yes, they were picked this morning." I smiled and said, "Thank you. They look delicious." Engaging in short conversations at markets or shops is a practical method to reinforce English in everyday life. Later, I walked along the river again. I narrated the scene aloud. The water is calm. Ducks are swimming. Children are feeding them bread. Describing real-life events in English trains your brain to think and speak naturally in the language. During the evening, my wife and I discussed plans for the coming week in English. I said, "Tomorrow I will visit the library to return books and practice reading." She replied, "I will prepare dinner early and write a shopping list." Talking about future plans in English enhances vocabulary and sentence structure while keeping language practice. Relevant to daily life, on Monday morning, I joined an online English conversation group. Each participant shared a story from their weekend. I told a story about volunteering in the park. Other participants discussed family activities and hobbies. Listening and speaking in a supportive group environment develops fluency and confidence. Later, I visited a nearby park. I observed children playing and narrated the scene aloud. The children are laughing and running. They are kicking a ball and chasing each other. Practicing observation in English is a simple and effective way to enhance fluency. That afternoon, I stopped by a cafe. I spoke briefly to the barista. I would like a cappuccino with less sugar. She smiled and said, "Of course. Would you like it hot or iced?" I replied, "Hot, please." Everyday interactions like this reinforce polite conversational phrases and vocabulary. In the evening, my wife and I prepared dinner together. I described the steps in English. First, we chop the vegetables. Then, we boil the water for pasta. She followed along and added, "I will stir the sauce while you drain the pasta." Using English during daily activities turns routine tasks into natural learning opportunities. On Tuesday, I had a short professional meeting. I explained project updates clearly. We completed the initial phase and are now reviewing results. The client responded positively, showing that clarity and simplicity in English are more effective than overly complex sentences. During lunch, I visited a bookstore and read a short story aloud. Focusing on pronunciation and intonation while reading helps improve natural speech patterns. Reading stories about daily life also exposes you to useful vocabulary and expressions.